Jealousy is a quiet storm. It builds slowly, often unnoticed, until it consumes everything in its path. For some, it's the inability to let go, to accept that a chapter has closed and they're no longer part of someone else's life. But when that jealousy festers in a heart already hardened, it becomes something far more dangerous, a twisted obsession with control and revenge. Emma Jangestig lived a peaceful life in Arboga, Sweden, with her 2 children, Max, 3, and Saga, 1. She was a dedicated mother who poured her love into creating a happy home for them. Her previous relationship with the children's father had ended, but they remained on civil terms for the sake of the children. Emma, however, was the primary caregiver, managing the challenges of single motherhood with grace. Emma had recently begun dating Torgny Hellberg, a supportive presence in her life. Torgny had quickly bonded with Max and Saga, and Emma felt optimistic about this new chapter in her life. She had begun to rebuild her world, focusing on the joy of her children and her blossoming relationship with Torgny. Max was an energetic and curious boy, and Saga was just beginning to explore the world around her. They were inseparable, and their laughter filled Emma's home. She devoted herself to their happiness, establishing a safe, loving environment. On the evening of March 17, 2008, Emma carried out her usual nighttime routine. She bathed Max and Saga, read them stories, and tucked them into bed like any other night. Max, always a little ball of energy, eventually fell asleep, while baby Saga dozed off peacefully beside him. The apartment settled into quiet as the children slept soundly in their beds, with nothing to suggest the horror that was about to unfold. The town of Arboga was a safe, quiet place where people rarely locked their doors. That night, however, an unknown intruder slipped into Emma's apartment while everyone slept. This intruder carried with him a hammer, a tool they would soon use to carry out a brutal, calculated attack. The violence was unimaginable. The attacker first struck Emma while she was sleeping. She was hit repeatedly in the head with the hammer, leaving her unconscious and severely injured. Blood soaked the room as the intruder moved through the apartment. But the horror didn't end there. The attacker then turned toward Max and Saga. The children, asleep in their beds, were completely defenseless. The intruder bludgeoned them both with the same hammer, killing them instantly. The attack was savage, cruel, and deeply personal. By the time the intruder fled, the once peaceful home had become a bloodbath. Emma lay unconscious, barely clinging to life, and her 2 children were left dead in their beds. The quiet home, filled with love and laughter just hours earlier, had been transformed into a scene of devastation. The next morning, concerned neighbors noticed something was wrong. Emma, usually up early with her children, had not been seen. The stillness was eerie, and one neighbor, worried for the family, went to check on them. When no one answered the door, they looked through a window and immediately called the police after seeing blood inside. Police arrived to find a scene of horror. Max and Saga were dead, both brutally beaten in their beds. Emma was found nearby, covered in blood and barely alive. She was rushed to the hospital in critical condition, where doctors worked to save her life. Her injuries were severe, multiple skull fractures and brain trauma. Her chances of survival were uncertain. The attack sent shock waves through the small town of Arboga, where violent crime was almost unheard of. The senseless murders of 2 young children left the community in disbelief. Flowers, toys, and candles were left in memory of Max and Saga as the town grieved. As detectives began piecing together the evidence, one thing was clear: this was no random act of violence. The extreme brutality of the crime suggested deep, personal motives. The police began investigating Emma's relationships, searching for anyone who might have had a reason to carry out such a heinous attack. Forensic teams scoured the apartment for clues. They collected DNA samples, fingerprints, and any evidence that might point them toward the killer. The attack was so violent that the crime scene was chaotic, but there were traces that would eventually lead the investigators to their suspect. Meanwhile, the Swedish media covered the case extensively. The loss of 2 innocent children in such a brutal way captured the nation's attention, and people across the country were horrified by the details emerging from the investigation. Emma, still unconscious in the hospital, had no idea what had happened to her children. She remained in a critical state as the doctors did everything they could to save her life. The physical injuries were severe, but the emotional devastation that awaited her was far worse. The police, under immense pressure, continued to work tirelessly to find the person responsible. As they followed the trail of evidence, it became clear that this crime had been carefully planned, and the person behind it had acted with pure malice. But who could have harbored such rage and violence against Emma and her children? The town of Arboga waited anxiously for answers, hoping the person responsible would be caught before they could strike again. In the immediate aftermath of the brutal attack on Emma Jangestig and the murders of her children, Max and Saga, police focused on the most obvious suspect, Emma's current boyfriend, Torgny Hellberg. When violent crimes like this occur within a family, the partner or spouse is often the first person law enforcement turns to, and Torgny was no exception. Torgny had been in a relationship with Emma for several months, and he had developed a bond with Max and Saga during that time. To outsiders, he appeared to be a supportive and caring partner, but the severity and personal nature of the crime meant that investigators needed to examine every possible angle, no matter how unlikely it seemed. Police immediately interviewed Torgny after the murders, scrutinizing his whereabouts on the night of March 17, 2008. Torgny was visibly distraught when he learned about the attack on Emma and the deaths of her children, but this did not prevent investigators from considering him as a suspect. Crimes of such brutality often stem from domestic conflicts, and police needed to establish if Torgny had any hidden motives or reasons for resentment. Investigators began by looking into Torgny's background, exploring his relationship history and any potential conflicts between him and Emma. They were also careful to question friends and family to build a clearer picture of the dynamic between him, Emma, and the children. While Emma's relationship with the father of her children had ended, her life with Torgny appeared stable. There were no reports of violence, and nothing suggested that Torgny had any reason to harm Emma or her children. Police were thorough, though. They looked into whether Torgny had a temper, a history of disputes, or any indications of jealousy or control over Emma. However, all leads pointed to Torgny being a genuinely caring and supportive partner. Most importantly, Torgny had a solid alibi for the night of the attack. Witnesses and physical evidence confirmed that he was not near the scene when the crime took place. As investigators dug deeper into the murders of Max and Saga, they uncovered a disturbing background that led them to their prime suspect, Christine Scheer. Born in Germany in 1976, Christine had an unremarkable life until she became dangerously obsessed with Torgny Hellberg, Emma Jangestig's then-boyfriend. Christine and Torgny had a brief relationship years earlier, but for Christine, the breakup left an emotional scar that festered into a dangerous obsession. When she learned that Torgny had moved on and was now dating Emma, Christine's jealousy escalated into rage. The investigation revealed that Christine had stalked Emma for months before the attack. She followed Emma's life from afar, gathering information about her routine and her children. The catalyst for Christine's actions was her irrational belief that Emma had stolen Torgny from her, even though Torgny had ended their relationship long before meeting Emma. Fueled by obsessive jealousy, Christine began plotting the ultimate revenge. On March 17, 2008, Christine traveled from Germany to Arboga, Sweden, with a clear plan in mind. She brought a hammer with her, the murder weapon. Surveillance footage from Arboga's train station captured her arriving in the town hours before the murders. She carefully monitored Emma's movements, waiting for the right moment to strike. That night, after sneaking into Emma's apartment, Christine carried out her gruesome plan. She attacked Emma first, delivering multiple blows to her head with the hammer, leaving her unconscious. Christine then turned to the sleeping children, Max and Saga, bludgeoning them to death in their beds. The brutality of the crime was unimaginable. This was no spur-of-the-moment act. It was the result of careful, calculated planning, driven by Christine's warped desire to destroy Emma's life. Christine fled back to Germany shortly after committing the murders, thinking she had gotten away with it. However, the forensic evidence left behind at the crime scene, DNA traces and fingerprints, quickly led Swedish authorities to her. Witnesses had also placed Christine near Emma's home on the night of the murders, further strengthening the case against her. On March 30, 2008, less than 2 weeks after the murders, Christine was arrested in Germany. She was soon extradited to Sweden, where she would face trial for the double murder of Max and Saga and the attempted murder of Emma. Christine Schurer's trial began in Sweden following her extradition, drawing national attention due to the horrific nature of the crime. The courtroom was packed with onlookers, eager to see justice served for the brutal murders of 3-year-old Max and 1-year-old Saga, and the attempted murder of their mother, Emma Jangestig. The prosecution presented a strong case, anchored by forensic evidence that tied Christine directly to the crime scene. DNA samples recovered from the hammer, the murder weapon, matched Christine's, and her fingerprints were found on the handle. In addition, surveillance footage showed Christine arriving in Arboga hours before the attack and leaving the town soon afterward. Her meticulous planning was evident, as she had traveled from Germany specifically to carry out the murders. Witnesses further corroborated Christine's presence near Emma's home on the night of the murders, placing her in the area just before the brutal attack. The prosecution laid out a timeline of Christine's actions, painting a clear picture of how she stalked Emma and her family before executing her revenge plan. They emphasized the premeditated nature of the crime. Christine had traveled across borders with the sole intention of killing. Christine's motive was rooted in her obsessive jealousy over Emma's relationship with Torgny Hellberg. The prosecution argued that Christine's deep-seated resentment drove her to the extreme act of murdering Emma's children to inflict maximum pain. This was not a crime of passion, but a calculated act of vengeance. Throughout the trial, Christine maintained her innocence, denying any involvement in the murders despite the overwhelming evidence. Her cold and emotionless demeanor during the proceedings shocked many in the courtroom, particularly when the details of the children's deaths were recounted. Christine showed no remorse for her actions, and her lack of empathy only reinforced the brutality of the crime in the eyes of the public. On October 14, 2008, after weeks of trial, Christine Schuer was found guilty of the murders of Max and Saga and the attempted murder of Emma Jangestig. The judge sentenced her to life imprisonment, the harshest sentence available under Swedish law. Additionally, Christine was permanently expelled from Sweden, ensuring that she could never return to the country after serving her sentence. For Emma and the community of Arboga, the conviction provided a sense of closure, but the emotional wounds from the crime would never fully heal. The loss of Max and Saga remained a constant pain for Emma, and no verdict could bring back her children. However, the trial ensured that Christine Schuer would never be free to hurt anyone again.